You don't have a focus problem. You have a clarity problem. That uncomfortable truth is the one you keep trying to avoid because it's easier to blame distractions, your phone, your environment, or even your mood. But strip everything away and what remains is simple. You sit down to study and within minutes your mind starts drifting, not because it's weak, but because it's confused. Confusion doesn't hold attention. Confusion repels it. Your brain is not designed to stay locked onto something it doesn't understand. It resists it, escapes it, looks for something easier, something clearer, something that makes sense. And yet, you keep forcing the same broken cycle. You open the book, read the same paragraph again, highlight lines that feel important, and convince yourself that this time it's going in. But it isn't, because recognition is not understanding. Seeing the same words again and again creates an illusion of progress, a false sense of familiarity that tricks you into thinking you're improving. But when the moment comes to actually use that knowledge, to recall it, to apply it, everything collapses. That's not bad luck. That's the direct result of how you've been training your mind. You've been taught to mistake effort for effectiveness. Long hours feel productive, so you trust them. Sitting with a book for hours feels disciplined, so you believe it's working. But effort without direction is just wasted energy. Time spent without clarity is just time gone. And deep down, you already feel this. That quiet frustration after a study session, that sense that nothing really stuck, that pressure building up as exams or deadlines get closer. It's not because you didn't try hard enough. It's because your approach never forced real understanding. The real problem is not that studying is hard. The real problem is that you've been doing it in a way that avoids thinking. You've been consuming information instead of confronting it. You've been reading instead of processing, watching instead of questioning, memorizing instead of understanding. And your brain knows the difference, even if you pretend not to. That's why it keeps slipping away, why it refuses to stay engaged, why it pushes you toward distraction. It's not broken. It's reacting exactly the way it's supposed to. So the issue isn't discipline. It isn't motivation. It isn't even intelligence. It's clarity. And until you fix that, nothing changes. You can sit longer, try harder, push yourself more, but you'll keep hitting the same wall. Because without clarity, there is no focus. Without understanding, there is no progress. And the longer you ignore that, the deeper you trap yourself in a cycle that feels productive on the surface, but leads nowhere underneath. Let's strip this down to something uncomfortable but undeniable. You don't actually understand most of what you study. You recognize it. You've seen it before. It looks familiar, it feels familiar, and that familiarity tricks your brain into believing it has control over the material. But recognition is shallow. It's fragile. The moment you're forced to recall the idea without looking or apply it in a slightly different way, it disappears. That gap between recognition and recall is where your real problem lives. This is how the illusion builds. You read a page once, maybe twice, and it starts to feel easier. The words don't seem as complex anymore. You move through the material faster. That speed gives you confidence. It feels like progress, but what actually happened is simple. Your brain just got used to seeing the same patterns. It didn't build a deeper understanding. It just reduced the shock of unfamiliarity. And you mistake that reduced friction for learning. There's a cognitive bias at play here, and it's ruthless. The brain prefers what feels easy, and it labels that ease as mastery. But real understanding doesn't feel easy at first. It feels slow, messy, and frustrating. It forces you to stop, question, and rebuild ideas from the ground up. And because that process is uncomfortable, you avoid it without even realizing it. You stay in the safe zone of rereading, highlighting, and passive review because it gives you quick emotional rewards. It feels like you're doing something. It feels productive, but it's not changing anything at a deep level. Think about this carefully. If someone asked you to explain what you just studied without looking at your notes, could you do it clearly? Not with memorized phrases, not with textbook language, but in your own simple words. Could you break it down so that someone with no background could understand it? If the answer is no, then the truth is obvious. You didn't learn it. You only passed over it. And here's where it gets harsher. The more you rely on recognition, the more confident you become in knowledge you don't actually have. That false confidence is dangerous. It delays correction. It makes you think you're prepared when you're not. And when reality finally tests you through an exam, a problem, or a real-life situation, it exposes everything at once. That's why it feels like your mind goes blank under pressure. It's not panic, it's the absence of real understanding. So the issue isn't effort. It's not even time, it's the quality of your thinking during that time. Passive exposure to information creates the illusion of competence, but it never builds the structure needed for recall and application. Until you confront that difference, you'll keep confusing activity with progress. And no matter how many hours you put in, the outcome will stay the same. Temporary familiarity followed by complete collapse when it actually matters. You've been trained to study like a machine, not like a thinker. From the very beginning, the system rewarded speed, repetition, and surface-level correctness. Memorize the definition, repeat the formula, match the pattern, move on. It created a habit where completing material feels more important than understanding it. So you chase completion. You measure progress by how many pages you covered, how many lectures you finished, how many notes you wrote, and all of it gives you a sense of movement, but not a sense of depth. This is where the real mistake hides. You treat information as something to collect instead of something to process. You stack facts on top of each other without building connections between them. But the brain doesn't work like a filing cabinet where you can just store isolated pieces and pull them out perfectly when needed. It works like a network. Every idea needs to connect to something else, to be shaped, simplified, and reconstructed in a way that makes sense internally. Without that reconstruction, the information remains fragile, disconnected, and easy to lose. The problem is that passive study methods never force that reconstruction. Reading keeps the structure intact, exactly as it was presented. Watching explanations hands you the logic already organized. Highlighting only marks what looks important without asking why it is important. None of these methods require you to take ownership of the idea. You stay on the surface, following along, mistaking exposure for engagement. It feels smooth because there is no resistance. But that smoothness is exactly what prevents real learning from happening. Real thinking introduces friction. It slows everything down. It forces you to pause and ask questions that don't have immediate answers. Why does this work? How does this connect to what was learned before? What happens if this part changes? That kind of thinking is mentally expensive, and your brain naturally tries to avoid it. It prefers efficiency over effort, familiarity over challenge. So it pulls you back toward passive habits, toward the comfort of simply going through the material again. And this creates a dangerous cycle. The more you rely on passive methods, the less capable you become of active thinking. Your ability to break down ideas weakens because you rarely practice it. Your confidence becomes tied to how familiar something feels instead of how well you can use it. Over time, you start needing more repetition just to maintain that familiarity, which makes studying feel longer, heavier, and more exhausting. Not because the material is harder, but because your method is inefficient. At a deeper level, this is not just a study problem. It's a thinking problem. When you avoid reconstructing ideas in your own words, you give up control over your understanding. You depend on how information is presented instead of developing the ability to shape it yourself. That dependency limits your flexibility. The moment a question changes form, the moment a problem looks slightly different, your mind struggles because it never built a strong internal model to begin with. So the mistake isn't that you're not working hard enough. It's that you're working in a way that avoids the very process that creates understanding. You've been moving forward without building anything solid underneath. And until that changes, more effort will only deepen the problem, not solve it. Stop trying to remember, start trying to explain. That single shift changes everything because it forces your brain to move from passive storage into active construction. Memorization feels safe because it gives you something to hold on to, something you can repeat. But repetition without understanding is fragile. The moment pressure is applied, it breaks. Explanation, on the other hand, demands structure. It forces you to take an idea, strip it down, and rebuild it in a way that actually makes sense to you. This is where the method becomes brutally effective. Take any concept you're studying and imagine you have to teach it to someone who knows nothing about it. No technical language, no complex shortcuts, just simple, clear reasoning. The moment you try to do this, something shifts. The gaps you ignored suddenly become obvious. The parts you thought you understood start falling apart under your own explanation. That discomfort is not a problem. That discomfort is the signal that real learning is finally happening because explanation exposes truth. It removes the hiding places that memorization creates. You can't fake clarity when you're forced to simplify. You can't rely on recognition when there's nothing in front of you to trigger it. You either understand the idea well enough to rebuild it or you don't. And that level of honesty is exactly what most study methods avoid. They let you stay comfortable, stay confident, stay unaware. This method does the opposite. It confronts you directly with the limits of your understanding. There's also something deeper happening when you explain. You're not just repeating information, you're reorganizing it. You're deciding what matters, what comes first, what connects to what. That process strengthens the mental pathways that make recall possible. It transforms knowledge from something external into something internal. Instead of depending on how the book explained it, You develop your own version of the idea, one that fits naturally into your thinking. That's what makes it stick, and the simplicity is what makes it powerful. When you can explain something in basic terms, it means you've removed unnecessary complexity and reached the core of the idea. Complexity often hides confusion. Simplicity reveals understanding. The clearer your explanation becomes, the stronger your grasp is. And the stronger your grasp is, the less effort it takes to recall and apply that knowledge later. This shift also changes how you respond to difficulty. Instead of feeling stuck and frustrated, you start seeing confusion as useful feedback. Every time you struggle to explain something, you've identified exactly where to focus. Instead of wasting time reviewing everything again, you target the weak point directly. That makes your study more efficient, more intentional, and far more effective. So the goal is no longer to get through the material. The goal is to be able to stand without it, to take an idea, break it down, and express it clearly without relying on the original source. That's when you know it's yours. That's when it stops being information you've seen and becomes knowledge you actually possess. Your brain is not designed to tolerate confusion for long. It constantly looks for patterns, for meaning, for structure. When it doesn't find those things, it disengages. That's why your attention drifts when you're studying something you don't fully understand. It's not laziness. It's a natural response to a lack of clarity. And when you force yourself to keep going without fixing that confusion, you're not building knowledge. You're layering uncertainty on top of uncertainty. The moment you try to explain something in simple terms, that confusion has nowhere to hide. You are forced to confront the exact point where your understanding breaks. Maybe it's a definition you never truly grasped. Maybe it's a step in a process that never made sense. Maybe it's a connection between two ideas that you assumed instead of actually understanding. Whatever it is, explanation brings it to the surface instantly. And that exposure is what makes this method so powerful, because here's the reality most people avoid. You've been confusing familiarity with mastery. Seeing something multiple times makes it feel easier, and that ease creates confidence. But that confidence is often built on recognition, not understanding. It's the same reason you can recognize a face, but struggle to describe it in detail. Recognition is passive. Mastery is active. One depends on exposure, the other depends on reconstruction. This is why traditional study habits fail under pressure. When you're in a test or real situation, you don't have the material in front of you. There are no visual cues to trigger recognition. You're relying entirely on what your mind has actually built. And if that structure was never properly formed, if it was based on repetition instead of understanding, then it collapses. That blank mind moment isn't random. It's the direct result of shallow learning. Explanation changes that because it forces your brain to build stronger connections. When you simplify an idea, you identify its core components. When you put it into your own words, you reshape it in a way that fits your thinking. When you connect it to other concepts, you anchor it in a broader network. All of this creates multiple pathways to access the same information. So instead of relying on a single fragile memory, you develop a flexible understanding that can adapt to different situations. There's also a deeper psychological shift happening. When you rely on recognition, you become dependent on the material. You need to see it again to feel confident. But when you rely on explanation, you build independence. You start trusting your own thinking, your ability to reconstruct ideas from scratch. That confidence is fundamentally different. It's not based on what's in front of you, but on what you can produce on your own. And this is where the illusion completely breaks. The moment you realize that understanding isn't about how familiar something feels, but about how clearly you can express it, your entire approach changes. You stop chasing comfort. You start chasing clarity. You stop measuring progress by how smooth something feels, and start measuring it by how well you can rebuild it without help. That shift is uncomfortable, but it's necessary, because as long as you keep relying on familiarity, you'll keep experiencing the same frustration, hours of effort, followed by weak results. But the moment you prioritize explanation, you align your study method with how the brain actually learns, and that's when things finally start to stick. There is nothing complicated about the process, but there is something demanding about it. It requires honesty, and most people avoid that. The process starts the moment you finish learning a concept. Not after hours of repetition, not after rereading it multiple times. Right after the first exposure, you stop and remove the support. Close the book, turn away from the screen. Now there is no safety net, no familiar structure to lean on. It's just you and what your mind has actually understood. Now you try to explain it. Not silently in your head where vague ideas can hide, but clearly, either by speaking out loud or writing it down. The form doesn't matter. the clarity does. You take the concept and begin breaking it into pieces. What is it? Why does it work? How does it connect to what you already know? As you move through this process, something becomes immediately obvious. Certain parts flow easily, almost effortlessly. Those are the areas where your understanding is solid. But then you hit resistance, a gap, a moment where your explanation becomes unclear, where your words slow down, where you start reaching for the exact phrasing from the book because you don't have your own. That moment is everything. That is the exact point where learning needs to happen. Most people ignore it. They go back, reread everything, and hope the problem disappears. But that's inefficient. You don't need to review the entire topic. You need to isolate the weak point. Go back specifically to that part. Study it again, but this time with a purpose. You're not just reading, you're trying to fix a specific gap in your understanding. That focus makes the process faster and far more effective. Then you repeat. Close the material again. Explain it again. Test whether the gap is still there. If it is, refine it further. If it's gone, move forward. This cycle continues until the explanation becomes smooth, simple, and natural, not memorized, not rehearsed, but understood to the point where you can express it without effort. That's when the concept becomes stable in your mind. What makes this process powerful is that it forces active engagement at every step. There is no room for passive consumption. You are constantly testing, correcting, and rebuilding. Each cycle strengthens the structure of your understanding. Each correction removes confusion. Over time, this creates a level of clarity that passive methods can't achieve, no matter how long you spend on them. There is also a shift in efficiency. Instead of spending hours reviewing everything, you spend focused time fixing what actually matters. Instead of hoping repetition will eventually lead to understanding, you directly target the problem areas. This reduces wasted effort and increases retention. You're no longer guessing whether you understand something, you're proving it to yourself repeatedly, and eventually, something changes. The need to rely on the original material starts to disappear. You begin to trust your own explanations. You can approach new problems with confidence because you're not just recalling information, you're reconstructing it. That's a completely different level of learning. It's not fragile, it's not dependent, it's built on clarity. So the process is simple. Learn, close, explain, identify gaps, fix them, repeat. But the simplicity is deceptive because doing it properly requires discipline, focus, and the willingness to confront what you don't know. And that's exactly why it works. Where everything else fails, this method feels uncomfortable because it forces you to face exactly what most study techniques avoid. You have been conditioned to chase comfort, to stay in the zone where familiarity creates a false sense of mastery. Highlighting, rereading, passive listening, these are all safe. They give the illusion of progress without exposing weaknesses. But real understanding lies on the other side of discomfort. The moment you try to explain a concept, you are forced out of that comfort zone. You confront the gaps, the assumptions, the areas where you are only pretending to understand. That confrontation is not pleasant, and that's exactly why it works. Discomfort is the signal, not the problem. Every hesitation in your explanation, every pause where words fail, every concept that suddenly seems slippery is a marker of where learning must happen. Most people try to avoid it by going back to the book, rereading the same paragraph, or skimming through notes again. That avoidance feels easier, but it's a trap. The mind needs friction to forge understanding. Without resistance, knowledge remains fragile and superficial. The more you lean into the struggle of explaining, the stronger the neural connections become. The more you embrace that friction, the deeper your mastery grows. And here's the harsh reality. The very reason this feels hard is the same reason most people fail. They want shortcuts, they want speed, they want reassurance that everything is getting in without effort. That desire for comfort produces passive learning habits, habits that are slow, shallow, and ultimately ineffective. If you're willing to tolerate the awkwardness of struggle, to wrestle with your own confusion instead of running from it, you immediately separate yourself from the majority. You start doing what 90% of learners won't, and that is why results start to compound quickly. There's another layer to this, discomfort that most people never realize. Struggling to explain something exposes cognitive illusions that have built up over years. You begin to see how much of what you know is superficial. You realize that familiarity was masking gaps. You notice the weak links in your mental framework. That revelation is shocking, even painful, but it's necessary. It's a brutal but honest mirror reflecting what actually exists in your mind. And the sooner you confront it, the sooner you can correct it. What makes this method unforgiving is that it doesn't allow you to hide behind repetition or memorization. There is no escape from clarity. You can't fake it. You either can explain it or you can't. Every time you stumble, that moment demands attention. And that demand, repeated over and over, gradually rewires how you think. You stop mistaking familiarity for understanding. You stop relying on passive cues. You start building knowledge that is resilient, flexible, and truly yours. The takeaway is simple but uncomfortable. If studying feels effortless, you are probably doing it wrong. If learning feels smooth, you are likely masking confusion. Growth comes from confronting struggle directly, from embracing friction instead of avoiding it, from tolerating the momentary frustration that comes when your mind refuses to play along. That friction is not an obstacle. It is the mechanism that turns confusion into clarity and effort into mastery. Stop measuring study by time. Stop thinking that hours spent staring at pages equals progress. That's an illusion, and it's one that keeps most people trapped in endless cycles of effort that produces almost nothing. Real learning isn't about how long you sit, it's about how clearly you understand. 1 hour of concentrated explanation where you wrestle with your own gaps is worth 10 hours of passive reading, highlighting, or note copying. That's not exaggeration. That's how the brain actually builds knowledge. Time alone never guarantees understanding. Clarity does. This is where the mindset shift becomes critical. Most people approach learning like filling a bucket with water. They pour in more and more, hoping something will stick. But the brain doesn't work like a bucket. It works like a network that needs structure, connections, and reinforcement. Without actively reconstructing ideas in your own words, the water just spills, leaving a shallow residue that looks like learning but vanishes under pressure. Measuring progress by duration only reinforces shallow methods. Measuring it by clarity forces active thinking, forces engagement, and forces results that last. You don't need more motivation. You don't need longer sessions or more caffeine. Those are just excuses for avoiding the real work. The work is deliberate. The work is uncomfortable. The work is building understanding from the ground up. Each concept you explain to yourself strengthens your mental model. Each gap you confront and fix solidifies the structure. That is what transforms information into knowledge. That is what creates mastery. This shift also changes how you prioritize effort. Instead of scattering energy across everything, you target exactly where the gaps are. You stop trying to cover everything superficially. You stop pretending that repetition alone equals retention. You focus intensely on what actually matters, the areas where your understanding is weak. That focus makes learning more efficient, faster, and more reliable. It transforms the way you engage with material, turning wasted hours into high-value sessions that leave a lasting impact. And this isn't just theory. It's a fundamental law of how thinking works. The brain builds connections through active use, through reconstruction, through testing itself. Exposure alone, even repeated exposure, does almost nothing to create those connections. Without applying knowledge in a meaningful way, without explaining, questioning, and restructuring, it remains fleeting. Recognition masquerades as mastery, familiarity masquerades as understanding. Only active engagement creates permanent change. So here's the truth that most refuse to face. Measuring learning by time is a trap. It gives you comfort while keeping you stagnant. Real results come when you measure understanding, when you demand clarity, when you focus on the gaps instead of the hours. 1 hour of real, brutal, honest explanation can surpass 10 hours of traditional study. And once you embrace that mindset, once you prioritize clarity over comfort, everything about your approach changes. Your study sessions become sharper, your recall becomes stronger, and your confidence becomes grounded in actual ability rather than false familiarity. This is the shift that separates those who flounder from those who excel. Time spent is irrelevant. Clarity gained is everything. Right now you have 2 choices, and neither one is easy. You can keep doing what feels comfortable. Rereading, highlighting, skimming notes, pretending you understand. It's safe. It feels like progress. It keeps you busy. But here's the brutal truth. Staying in that comfort zone guarantees the same results. Hours of effort, frustration, and anxiety, only to realize that when it matters most, an exam, a project, a real-world problem, you can't perform. That's the trap most people live in, thinking they're improving while they're actually spinning in place. Or, you can do what feels uncomfortable. You can confront the gaps in your knowledge, wrestle with confusion, and take responsibility for your understanding. You can force yourself to explain, to simplify, to rebuild every idea in your own words. That path is uncomfortable because it exposes exactly how little you actually know. It demands honesty, it demands effort. It refuses to let you hide behind familiarity or repetition, and yet, that is the path that produces mastery. That is the path that actually works. No one is coming to fix your discipline. No perfect moment is coming. Waiting for motivation is a fool's game. Waiting for clarity to arrive without effort is even worse. The world doesn't reward intentions. It rewards results. And results are born from action, not hope. If you keep waiting for the right time or the perfect mood, you will stay stuck indefinitely. The uncomfortable truth is that your progress is entirely in your hands. Everything else, time, tools, environment, is secondary. Your habits determine your outcome. Every passive hour compounds into wasted potential. Every moment you avoid confronting confusion strengthens your gaps, and every time you push through, clarify, and reconstruct knowledge, you compound mastery. The difference between failure and success isn't luck. It's method. It's willingness to face discomfort and act. It's the choice to demand clarity over comfort. And here's the final, unavoidable reality. If you don't change how you approach studying, nothing changes. You can read more, highlight more, spend endless hours with no progress. That's the harsh truth most refuse to face. But if you shift your method, if you focus on understanding, explanation, and active reconstruction, you set yourself apart from everyone still trapped in passive routines. You gain control over your learning, over your mind, over your results. This is the moment where the difference is made. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, the choice is yours. Continue the cycle of comfort and familiarity, or embrace the uncomfortable path that actually works. The longer you wait, the more entrenched the cycle becomes, and the longer you wait, the harder it will be to break free. Every time you choose comfort over clarity, you're choosing stagnation. Every time you choose to confront confusion, you're choosing growth. Which path will you take? The answer determines your results, your confidence, and the reality of what you can achieve. Here's the challenge, and it's as simple as it is brutal. Pick one topic today, just one. Don't overwhelm yourself with an entire syllabus. Don't distract yourself with multiple subjects. Focus. Learn it. Then close the book, turn off the screen, and explain it. Force yourself to break it down until it makes sense in your own words. If it doesn't, go back and fix the gap. Repeat. Don't stop until you can express the concept clearly, effortlessly, like it's second nature. That is how real understanding is built. No excuses, no shortcuts. The truth is that the longer you delay, the more comfortable avoidance becomes, and the harder it is to break free from the cycle of passive learning. Stop blaming time, your environment, or lack of motivation. Those are illusions. Your results are a reflection of your habits, your methods, and your willingness to face the uncomfortable truth. Recognition is not understanding, and effort without clarity is wasted energy. This is the moment to take ownership. Everything you've done before was preparation. Everything you do now determines whether you move forward or stay trapped in the same pattern. 1 hour of brutal honesty with your own understanding can surpass weeks of passive study. One moment of confronting confusion head-on can rewire your approach entirely. That is the difference between stagnation and mastery. Understand this clearly. Learning is not a spectator sport. You can't outsource it. You can't fake it with repetition, notes, or highlighting. You must actively engage, expose the gaps, and reconstruct knowledge in your own mind. Anything less is wasted time, wasted effort, and wasted potential. The moment you internalize that, your results start to change immediately. So stop waiting. Stop wishing. Pick a single topic. Explain it, break it, fix it. Repeat until it's yours. The longer you wait, the deeper the cycle of superficial learning embeds itself. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to achieve real mastery. Here's the final truth. Results don't come from intention. They don't come from hours spent passively staring at material. They come from clarity. They come from action. They come from the willingness to face what you don't know and fix it relentlessly. So ask yourself, are you going to keep pretending you understand, or are you going to do the work that actually makes a difference? The choice is yours and the clock is ticking. Mastery isn't promised, it's earned. Now go earn it.